The first thing Victor Hale heard was the sound of something tearing itself apart. It wasn't a clean mechanical failure. It was a violent, uneven ripping noise, like metal screaming under strain. The helicopter shuddered midair, its nose dipping sharply as warning lights exploded across the dashboard in angry reds and oranges. Victor's stomach rose into his throat. "What's happening?" he shouted. The pilot didn't answer. The man in the front seat was slumped forward, his headset hanging crooked, blood streaking down from a gash near his hairline. Smoke drifted from beneath the control panel, thin at first, then thicker, curling through the cabin like a living thing. Victor reached out instinctively, shaking the pilot's shoulder. "Hey! Hey!" No response. The helicopter dropped suddenly, the city below rushing closer, glass towers and highways blurring together in a terrifying rush. Victor slammed back into his seat as gravity seemed to vanish for a heartbeat. This was not how his life was supposed to end. Victor Hale had built an empire from nothing. He had clawed his way out of a childhood that smelled like mildew and disappointment and into boardrooms where people spoke his name with fear and respect. He owned companies, jets, buildings that scraped the sky itself. And now the sky was trying to kill him. "Mayday," Victor muttered, fumbling for the radio with shaking hands. Static hissed back at him. Nothing else. Another violent lurch threw the helicopter sideways. In the back seat, Daniel Brooks braced himself, gripping the edge of the bench as his boots scraped against the metal floor. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might break through his ribs, but his eyes were calm in a way that surprised even him. Because he recognized that sound. Because he had heard it before. Not in this helicopter, not in this life, but in another version of himself that felt both distant and painfully close. A younger Daniel, wearing a flight suit with his name stitched over the chest. A man who once trusted machines with his life. The helicopter dipped again, harder this time. Victor's voice cracked. "We're going down." Daniel leaned forward. "Sir." Victor turned, panic blazing in his eyes. "What?" Daniel swallowed once, steadying his breath. "Your pilot is unconscious. If we don't do something, we're not making it." Victor laughed, sharp and hysterical. "Do something? You think I don't see that?" "I can land it," Daniel said. The words came out quiet, almost gentle. Victor stared at him like he hadn't heard correctly. "You can what?" "I can land it," Daniel repeated. "Not perfectly, not clean, but alive." The helicopter shook violently, alarms screaming louder now, the airframe rattling like it was coming apart at the seams. Victor looked from Daniel to the unconscious pilot to the chaos of flashing lights. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I used to fly." The memory hit him before Victor could respond. 10 years ago. A cold morning on a military airstrip, the air sharp with fuel and frost. Daniel had stood beside a training helicopter, helmet tucked under his arm, watching the sun rise. He remembered the weight of pride in his chest, the certainty that he had found the one thing in life he was meant to do. He remembered Emma as a newborn, sleeping in a carrier against her mother's chest, her tiny fingers curled into fists like she was already holding on to something important. He remembered kissing her forehead before walking toward the aircraft, promising silently that he would always come back. Flying had been his dream, his discipline, his escape. Until it wasn't. Until the day a routine training flight went wrong. Not because of him. Because of a faulty maintenance report that someone higher up didn't want traced back to them. Because it was easier to let a junior pilot take the fall than admit to a systemic failure. Daniel remembered standing in an office that smelled like old coffee and paperwork, listening as his commanding officer read the decision without looking at him. Negligence, the man had said. Daniel had argued, shown his logs, pointed out inconsistencies. Just for a review. The answer had been the same every time. Denied. Discharged. Career over. He remembered walking off base with a cardboard box in his hands. His future reduced to personal effects and unanswered questions. He remembered the look in his wife's eyes when he told her. the fear she tried to hide. And then the years after. The bills. The late nights. The funeral that came too soon. The way Emma clung to him afterward, like she was afraid he might disappear too. Back in the helicopter, Daniel blinked the memory away as another alarm screamed. Victor's voice cut through the noise. "You expect me to trust you right now?" Daniel met his gaze. "You don't have another option." For a moment Victor hesitated. He was a man used to control. Used to being the smartest person in the room. Used to bending situations to his will. This situation didn't care who he was. The helicopter dropped again, the city rushing closer, the river below reflecting sunlight like a blade. Victor exhaled sharply. "Tell me what to do." Daniel leaned forward, every instinct snapping into place like muscle memory waking from a long sleep. His hands hovered over the controls, not touching yet. "First," he said, "we stabilize the descent. Don't fight it. Let it fall, but controlled." Victor's hands trembled as he followed instructions. "Easy," Daniel murmured. "Feel it. Don't force it." The helicopter bucked, then steadied slightly, the descent smoothing just enough to give them a chance. Victor stared at Daniel, disbelief mixing with hope. "How do you know all this?" Daniel didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the instruments. "Because I was trained to keep people alive." Smoke thickened in the cabin. The smell of burning electronics filled Daniel's nose. Below them, a strip of open land came into view near the river's edge. Uneven, rough, but empty. "That's our spot," Daniel said. "It's going to be rough." Victor swallowed hard. "How rough?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Enough that you'll remember it." The helicopter shuddered violently as they descended, metal screaming in protest. Victor gripped the controls, sweat pouring down his face, every ounce of confidence stripped away. Daniel spoke calmly, steadily, like he was guiding a child across a busy street. "Left. Now ease back. Don't pull, steady." The ground rushed up. Impact came like an explosion. The helicopter slammed down, skidding across dirt and grass, rotors shattering, glass bursting inward. The world spun violently, then stopped with a final, bone-rattling jolt. Silence fell. Daniel lay still, chest heaving, ears ringing. Pain flared in his shoulder, sharp but manageable. He opened his eyes. They were alive. Victor turned slowly, staring at him with something like awe. "You saved my life," Victor whispered. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, the weight of it washing over him. "I just did what I knew how to do." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder by the second. Daniel didn't know yet that this moment would change everything. He didn't know that kindness and competence, offered without recognition, would soon be tested in the cruelest way possible. All he knew was that for the first time in a long time, he had touched the sky again, and survived. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Daniel Brooks had not planned to be a hero that morning. He woke before sunrise in the small apartment that still smelled faintly of last night's rice and detergent. The heater rattled in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the winter air. Daniel lay still for a moment, listening to his daughter's breathing from the next room, slow and even. That sound grounded him more than anything else in the world. Emma was 13 now. Too old to need bedtime stories every night, but young enough to still pretend she didn't listen when Daniel spoke softly through her door before leaving for work. "I'll be back before dinner," he whispered, even though she was asleep. He always said it. He always came back. Daniel pulled on his jacket, checked his phone, and sighed at the notification from the temp agency. One-day job. Private client. Helipad delivery. Extra pay. Extra pay mattered. The bills on the kitchen table didn't care that he was tired. The fridge didn't care that he'd worked 6 nights in a row. Emma's school didn't care that he had once flown aircraft for a living. So Daniel drank his coffee, grabbed his gloves, and went out into the cold. The helipad sat on the edge of the city, tucked behind a sleek corporate building with mirrored windows. Daniel felt out of place the moment he arrived. Everything was clean, polished, expensive. Men in tailored coats moved with purpose, speaking into headsets, barely noticing him. He signed in, hoisted the crate, and waited. That was when he saw the helicopter. Black. Immaculate. The kind of machine he used to study late into the night, memorizing specs and systems, imagining himself in the pilot's seat. Seeing it again stirred something in his chest he hadn't let surface in years. Nostalgia. Longing. The pilot was already running checks when Daniel approached. He couldn't help himself. His eyes tracked the rotors, the tail assembly, the subtle vibration that most people wouldn't notice. But Daniel noticed. He always noticed. "Morning," Daniel said casually. The pilot glanced at him. "Morning." Daniel hesitated, then nodded toward the aircraft. "You feeling that vibration?" The pilot frowned slightly. "What vibration?" Daniel tilted his head, listening. "Left side. Could be nothing. Could be imbalance." The pilot shrugged. "She flew fine yesterday." Before Daniel could respond, a voice cut through the air. "Let's move." Victor Hale had arrived. He walked like a man who expected the world to adjust itself around him. His coat probably cost more than Daniel's rent. His expression said he didn't have time for delays or discussions. The pilot straightened. "All set, sir." Daniel cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may." Victor looked at him for the first time. Really looked. His eyes flicked over Daniel's jacket, his boots, the crate. "Who are you?" Victor asked. "Delivery," Daniel replied. "I just wanted to mention." "We're late," Victor interrupted. "Load it and go." The pilot hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Daniel felt a familiar frustration tighten in his chest. The same feeling he'd had years ago when warnings were ignored because of rank, not logic. He loaded the crate, stepped back, and turned to leave. "Actually," Victor said, already boarding. "You riding back?" Daniel blinked. "I wasn't told." "Fine. Get in. Saves time." The words were careless. Usual. To Victor it meant nothing. To Daniel it meant stepping back into the sky. He hesitated, then climbed aboard. Now, hours later, with the helicopter wrecked and sirens surrounding them, that moment replayed in Daniel's mind with bitter clarity. If he had insisted, if he had spoken louder, if he had walked away. Paramedics pulled him from the wreckage carefully. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he barely noticed. His eyes searched for Victor, who was being helped out on the other side, shaken but alive. Their eyes met across the wreckage. Victor nodded once. It wasn't gratitude yet. It was recognition. At the hospital, Daniel sat alone on a plastic chair, a paper cup of water in his hand. His phone buzzed endlessly with missed calls from unknown numbers. News alerts. Messages from coworkers. He ignored them and called Emma. "I'm okay," he said the moment she answered. Her voice cracked. "Dad. What happened?" "Just work stuff," he said gently. "I'll be home later. Promise." Daniel closed his eyes. "Promise." Across the city, Victor Hale stood in front of cameras, doctors fussing over him, reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Hale, how did you survive?" Victor hesitated. He glanced toward the hospital doors, where Daniel had disappeared. "The pilot handled it," Victor said finally. "Trained professionals. It was easier, safer." That night, Daniel came home exhausted, bruised, and sore. Emma hugged him tightly, refusing to let go. "You smell like smoke," she said. Daniel smiled weakly. "Guess I do." He didn't know yet that the story had already begun to change without him. He didn't know that the kindness of stepping forward, of using skills long buried, would soon be repaid with something crueler than silence. He went to bed believing he had done the right thing. And sometimes that belief is the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The first headline hit before Daniel finished his morning coffee. Billionaire survives helicopter incident. Quick thinking saves lives. Daniel stared at the screen, squinting as if the words might rearrange themselves into something closer to the truth. The photo beneath the headline showed Victor Hale stepping out of an ambulance, jacket draped over his shoulders, expression solemn but composed. There was no mention of Daniel. No mention of the unconscious pilot. No mention of the hands that had steadied the controls when everything else had failed. Daniel scrolled. Another article. Another photo. Another version of the same story. He set the phone down slowly and rubbed his face. The apartment was quiet. Emma had already left for school. The sink dripped steadily, a reminder of a repair he'd been putting off. "It's fine," he muttered to himself. "It doesn't matter." But it did. By noon the story had shifted. A push notification buzzed across his screen while he was unloading boxes at the warehouse. Investigation launched into unauthorized passenger actions. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He read the article twice, then a third time, his hands trembling slightly. The language was careful but sharp, implying recklessness, interference, poor judgment. A source close to the situation suggested that an untrained civilian may have worsened the emergency. Untrained. Daniel laughed once, short and hollow. His supervisor called him into the office an hour later. The man didn't offer a chair. "You touched the controls?" the supervisor asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes, I landed the helicopter." The supervisor's jaw tightened. He slid a printed document across the desk. Daniel recognized the logo at the top immediately. Victor Hale's company. "This says you interfered," the supervisor said. "That you caused additional damage." Daniel stared at the paper. His name looked strange there, flattened into black ink, stripped of context. "That's a lie," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe," the supervisor replied. "But it's not my fight. You're suspended. Effective immediately." The word echoed. Suspended meant unpaid. It meant rent notices and empty refrigerators and long nights staring at the ceiling, calculating what could be sold. Daniel walked out without another word. The media found him that evening. A van parked across the street. A camera pointed at his building. A reporter called his name as he ushered Emma inside. "Dad," Emma whispered, eyes wide. "What's happening?" Daniel closed the door behind them, heart pounding. "Nothing you need to worry about." But she worried anyway. The next morning a clip went viral. Daniel watched it on his phone, sitting alone at the kitchen table. A blurred photo of him loading the crate. A voiceover describing him as a mysterious delivery worker who may have played a role in the dangerous incident. Comments scrolled endlessly beneath the video. "Cloud chaser. Fraud. Put him in jail." Emma came home from school early that day. She dropped her backpack by the door and went straight to her room. Daniel followed, heart sinking. "What happened?" he asked gently. She turned, tears streaking her face. "They said you almost killed someone." The words hit harder than any headline. Daniel knelt in front of her, hands shaking as he wiped her cheeks. "I didn't," he said. "I saved him." "Then why does everyone hate you?" she asked. Daniel had no answer. The official letter arrived 2 days later. Charges pending. Endangerment. Unauthorized operation of an aircraft. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, letter in hand, the weight of it pressing down on his chest. He thought of his training, his discipline, the years he'd spent learning to make the right decisions under pressure. None of it mattered now. He was a nobody with no resources, standing in the shadow of a billionaire. Victor Hale watched the coverage from his penthouse, glass walls framing a city that suddenly felt colder. Lawyers sat across from him, calm and efficient. "We've contained the narrative," one said. "This insulates you." Victor nodded absently. On the screen, Daniel's face appeared briefly as he shielded Emma from a camera. Something twisted in Victor's chest. "He saved my life," Victor said quietly. The lawyers exchanged looks. "That's not how the record reads." Victor turned away from the window, unease growing. He remembered Daniel's voice in the helicopter. Teddy. He remembered the certainty that had cut through his fear. But he said nothing, because saying something would cost him. And the machine rolled on. Daniel's court date was set. Neighbors avoided him. Old co-workers stopped answering messages. Even the temp agency cut ties. At night, Daniel lay awake listening to the city outside, wondering how doing the right thing had brought him here. He thought of the sky. He thought of the sound of the rotors. He thought of the man who had walked away alive while Daniel's world collapsed around him. And for the first time since the crash, Daniel felt something dangerous creeping in beneath the fear. Anger. Not loud. Not explosive. Just quiet, heavy, and waiting. Because injustice has a way of pushing even the kindest people toward a breaking point. And the breaking point was getting closer. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The courtroom smelled like old wood and disinfectant. Daniel noticed it the moment he stepped inside, as if his senses had sharpened under the weight of what was at stake. His suit felt stiff, unfamiliar, pulled from the back of the closet and pressed carefully the night before. It was the same suit he'd worn to his wife's funeral years ago. The thought tightened his chest. Emma walked beside him, her small hand wrapped around his wrist instead of his hand, like she was afraid to let go but didn't want anyone to see. She wore her best dress, the blue one Daniel had bought on clearance for special occasions. This felt like one, even if it wasn't the kind you celebrated. They took their seats. Across the room, the prosecutor shuffled papers confidently, already smiling for someone in the gallery. Daniel's public defender leaned in and whispered reassurances that didn't quite land. Too many cases. Too little time. Daniel could feel it. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then sat. And just like that, Daniel Brooks became a case number. The prosecutor spoke first, voice polished and precise, painting a picture of recklessness and ego. An unqualified civilian. A dangerous decision. A billionaire's life put at risk by someone who wanted to play hero. Daniel stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. He wanted to stand up and shout. He wanted to explain about the vibration, about the unconscious pilot, about the way the helicopter had been seconds from freefall. But the room wasn't built for truth. It was built for stories. And the story being told didn't include him as a hero. A grainy photo appeared on a screen. Daniel recognized it instantly. Him mid-step on the helipad, crate balanced on his shoulder. "Is this the defendant?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," someone replied. Emma's grip tightened. Daniel felt her shaking. The prosecutor continued, voice sharp now. "Despite having no authorization, no current certification, and no communication with air traffic control, the defendant admits to taking control of the aircraft." Daniel's defender stood. "He acted in an emergency." "Objection," the prosecutor snapped. "We'll get to that." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Daniel's chest burned. This was it. This was how it ended. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The sound cut through the room like a blade. A murmur rippled outward, whispers spreading seat to seat. Heads turned. Phones lifted, quickly lowered by bailiffs. Daniel turned slowly. Victor Hale walked in. No entourage, no smile, no tailored confidence. Just a man carrying the weight of a lie. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Victor didn't sit. He walked forward and raised a hand slightly. "Your Honor," he said, "I need to speak." The courtroom stilled. "This is highly irregular," the prosecutor began. Victor turned to him, eyes hard. "So is sending an innocent man to prison to protect my reputation." Hush fell. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. Victor approached the witness stand, ignoring the frantic whispers of lawyers scrambling behind him. "I'm prepared to testify," Victor said. "Under oath." The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Proceed." Victor took the stand. He looked out at the courtroom, then at Daniel. Their eyes met. And Victor's broke. "I lied," Victor said into the microphone. The words echoed, heavy and undeniable. I allowed my legal team to push a narrative that blamed this man for what happened, Victor continued. Because it was easier. Because it protected me. Gasps filled the room. Emma covered her mouth. Daniel felt like the floor had tilted beneath him. Victor took a shaky breath. The pilot was unconscious. The helicopter was failing. Daniel Brooks recognized the danger before anyone else did. He took control calmly, professionally, and landed that aircraft in a way that saved my life. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Your Honor. I'm not finished, Victor said, his voice firm now. He gestured toward the screen. There are flight recordings. Audio. Data logs. I ordered them suppressed. A collective inhale swept the room. Victor looked at Daniel again. I owe him more than an apology. I owe him the truth. The judge's face hardened. Bailiff, collect those recordings immediately. The next hour felt unreal. Audio played through the courtroom speakers. Daniel's voice, steady and controlled, cutting through alarms and panic. Ease back. Don't fight it. We're going to land. The pilot's silence. Victor's panicked breathing. The truth, undeniable and raw. When the recordings ended, the room was silent. The judge cleared his throat. Charges dismissed, he said. With prejudice. Masab. Daniel didn't move. It took a moment for the words to sink in. Dismissed. Free. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited like vultures. Victor stepped forward first. I failed, he said plainly. And I intend to make it right. He turned and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. I'm funding an emergency aviation training program, Victor continued. Civilian response. Disaster preparedness. And Daniel Brooks will lead it. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes exploded. Daniel looked down at Emma, who was smiling through tears. What does that mean? She whispered. Daniel laughed softly, disbelief cracking through his voice. It means, we're okay. Victor leaned closer. You gave me my life back, he said quietly. Let me give you yours. For the first time since the helicopter hit the ground, Daniel felt the weight lift from his chest. Justice hadn't just arrived, had spoken, and the world was listening now. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. 5 years later, the sky was calm in a way Daniel Brooks never took for granted. The morning sun stretched across the open airfield, warming the concrete and catching the edges of spinning rotors as a training helicopter lifted smoothly into the air. Daniel stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching closely. His eyes tracking every movement with quiet focus. Easy, he murmured under his breath, though the pilot couldn't hear him. Don't fight it. The helicopter descended cleanly, touching down with practiced confidence. Daniel smiled. Around him, the Brooks Emergency Flight Institute hummed with life. Trainees moved between classrooms and aircraft. Instructors reviewed checklists, and the distant sound of engines blended with laughter and shouted instructions. 5 years ago, this place had been an empty stretch of land near the riverbank where his life had nearly ended. Now it was saving lives. Dad! Daniel turned just in time to catch Emma as she ran into him, her arms wrapping around his waist. She was taller now, nearly eye level, her hair pulled back, her confidence unmistakable. Gone was the frightened girl who once clutched his wrist in a courtroom. How was class? Daniel asked. He grinned. Passed my solo simulation. He raised an eyebrow. No shortcuts. None, she said proudly. You trained me. That hit him harder than any applause ever had. Across the field, a familiar figure approached, hands clasped behind his back, walking slower than he used to. Victor Hale no longer looked like a man in a hurry. His suits were simpler now, his eyes softer. You run a tight operation, Victor said, stopping beside Daniel. Daniel nodded. Lives depend on it. They stood together, watching another helicopter rise. Victor exhaled. I still think about that day. So do I, Daniel replied. Victor hesitated, then spoke quietly. I built my life believing success meant control. That if I stayed on top, nothing could touch me. That helicopter taught me how wrong I was. Daniel glanced at him. Fear has a way of doing that. And people, Victor added. The ones we overlook. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The world had changed since that crash. The media cycle had moved on, but the impact hadn't. Daniel's program had trained hundreds of pilots, first responders, and civilians to handle emergency landings and aircraft failures. Lives had been saved, families spared, and Daniel had finally returned to the sky, on his own terms. That evening, the airfield emptied, the sun sinking low and painting the horizon gold. Daniel locked up the hangar and drove home with Emma, music low, windows cracked. Their house wasn't large, but it was theirs. Emma dropped her bag by the stairs and paused. Dad? Yeah. She hesitated, then said softly, I was really scared back then. Daniel nodded. Me too. But you didn't stop being good, she said. Even when it hurt. Daniel swallowed. I think that's why everything changed. Later, after Emma went to bed, Daniel sat on the porch alone, listening to the quiet. He thought about the man he had been, the pilot stripped of his wings, the single father counting coins, the invisible worker ignored on a helipad. He thought about the moment he could have stayed silent, the moment he chose not to. Life didn't reward him immediately, tested him. It humiliated him. It nearly broke him. But kindness, real kindness, the kind that costs something, has weight. It bends the future in ways you can't see at first. Daniel looked up at the sky, stars faint but present. Somewhere out there, helicopters flew safely through the night. Somewhere, people landed when they thought they wouldn't. And somewhere, someone would be tempted to stay quiet when speaking up mattered most. Daniel smiled softly. Because he knew now that the measure of a life wasn't wealth or power or recognition. It was what you did when the world was falling, and whether you chose to help land it anyway.